Hello, this is the Introduction to Psychology, History, and Approaches Section B lecture. Our prioritized standards are 1B, and objectively, we'll be able to compare and contrast historical schools of psychology. While speculation into the nature of human behavior and mental processes dates back to ancient times, psychology as we know it began in 1879 with German scientist Wilhelm Wundt. I know there's W's there, sorry. With his school of psychology known as structuralism, which was devoted to uncovering the basic structures or components that make up the mind and thought. Now, structuralists sought to understand the elements of consciousness or the conscious experience, which it identified as sensation and perception, memory, attention, emotion, cognition, learning, and language. Now, structuralists asserted that all mental activity was made up of combinations of these different basic processes. Now, structuralist experiments actually focused on the use of introspection, which is the process of reporting on one's own conscious mental experiences. But critics objected to introspection as being too subjective. Now, with introspection, the general nature is subjects would be presented with a variety of simple stimuli, and then they would be asked to respond with either a press of a lever or potentially a description of their sensations. With these findings based on people's descriptions of their thoughts or feelings, therefore possibly the accuracy could not be ensured. Now, in the late 19th century, American psychologist William James argued structuralism's approach was too narrow and should include the function of consciousness. That led to the school of psychology known as functionalism, that believed in a stream of consciousness as a mental process with no static structure, but rather continually flowing, changing, and interacting with the environment. Now, functionalism believed mental processes could be best understood in terms of their adaptive purpose and function. This was inspired by Darwin's emphasis on organisms adapting to their behavior. So again, this one is going to be inspired by Darwin and the theory of evolution. Now, James wrote on several things, but he wrote on the development of learned habits, emotions, the psychology of religion, and also a lot on teaching. This actually helped usher in the progressive education movement of John Dewey that emphasized learning by doing rather than through lectures and memorization. In the early 20th century, in Germany, a school of psychology known as Gestalt psychology rose that looked at the human mind and behavior as a whole rather than just as parts or elements of consciousness of the structuralist. So, such as our perception of a face rather than just seeing a conglomeration of different types of lines, colors, and textures. So, trying to investigate why is that? Gestalt psychology sought to understand how the brain works by studying perception and perceptual learning, which they believed was the means to understanding how the brain truly works. Gestalt psychologists like Max Wertheimer studied visual illusions and ambiguous figures as a part of their work. For instance, a common one was the Necker cube, which seemingly changes perspectives as you continue to look at it. So, for instance, if you are looking at this, is this the top of the box? Or is this the top of the box? So potentially you can look and it'll change perspectives on you. So those were some of the things they used to investigate the mind as a whole. In the early 20th century, American psychologist John B. Watson led a school of psychology known as behaviorism that sought to make psychology an objective science focused on behavior, to the actual exclusion of mental processes, meaning they aren't concerned about mental processes, period, only the behavior. Watson believed psychology should deal solely with observable events, like stimuli from the environment, and the organism's response to that stimuli. Now, behaviorists objected to introspection. This was actually the first psychology school to object to that, caring not for what people were thinking, but rather wanting to know how people would behave. So there was a famous study called the Albert study that behaviorists did back before we had ethics in psychology, where they basically taught a little boy to be deathly afraid of furry objects. So just want to see how you're going to behave, not necessarily what you think about things. In the late 19th century, Viennese physician Sigmund Freud and his disciples led a school of psychology known as psychoanalysis that emphasized learning about conflicts between the conscious and the unconscious mind and the processes. Now, the term psychoanalysis refers broadly to both Freud's psychoanalytic theory and also to his psychoanalytic treatment method. Now, conscious mind meaning what you think, and unconscious meaning what you don't necessarily know you're thinking but could still be thinking. Psychoanalysis operates on the assumption that all people possess unconscious thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories. Freud contended that mental disorders arise from conflicts in the unconscious mind and could be treated by bringing repressed fears and conflicts into the conscious mind. Now, things like Freud's psychoanalysis, behaviorism, Gestalt psychology, these all outlasted structural and functionalism. There are a few others, but those are the primary five that we are talking about. All right, that concludes Introduction to Psychology and History and Approaches, Section B lecture. Our prioritized standard again was 1B, and objectively now you can compare and contrast historical schools of psychology.